Hello, we're picking up this video with the Ethics of Ambiguity, the third chapter, first section of that chapter, the aesthetic attitude. So the aesthetic attitude is related to some of the things that Beauvoir had said about the critic in the previous chapter. The aesthetic attitude is simply attempting to take a detached and non-committal attitude toward the world and specifically the events that are unfolding in the world. Because those events are always related to people, their projects, and therefore to their freedom, the opportunity that presents itself to people in their freedom, as well as the hindrances that present themselves, both natural obstacles that make it difficult for people to achieve their goals, but also the way that some people will use their freedom to hinder and oppress others. So we get here a good glimpse and articulation of Beauvoir's view of oppression and what actually sort of counts as oppression. Throughout this chapter, there's a pretty detailed discussion of oppression. The aesthetic attitude renders people complicit through their belief that they don't really have anything to do with it, or it doesn't concern them. Remember, the second chapter ends with this argument that we need each other, that we are in a world connected to other people, entangled in projects and commitments that involve others, that intersect with other people's involvements, their commitments and projects, and so on. So we cannot pretend, or we cannot adopt an attitude that ignores that, or that obscures it, or leads us to consider our actions as if they occur in some sort of vacuum, or detached from the moment, the situation, and the other people that we encounter in that situation. That's what she starts. Thus, just continuing right from the last chapter, every man has to do with other men. The world in which he engages himself is a human world in which each object is penetrated with human meanings. So again, you can think back to that previous chapter at the beginning where she talks about the child who encounters values and meaning in the world that have been formed by others and are presented to them by others and are historically conditioned by, again, the community of people into which the child emerges and into which they're sort of thrown, to use that existentialist language. So they find values already established in the world, being taught to them. The objects that appear to them appeared conditioned by the values of others, and so on and so forth. And so this means that, Beauvoir goes on, through this world, each individual can give freedom its concrete content. So again, it's not that we have freedom in the abstract. For the existentialist, that's nonsense. We can only have a concrete freedom that's embedded in a particular circumstance and related to our sort of individual activities relative to a community that we find ourselves. She introduces the aesthetic attitude by basically saying, the objection will be raised that he can will nothing for another, since another is free in all circumstances. Men are always disclosing being. In Buchenwald, a Nazi concentration camp, Buchenwald as well as in the Blue Isles of the Pacific, in hovels as well as in palaces. Something is always happening in the world, and in the movement of keeping being at a distance, one cannot consider its different transformations with a detached joy or find reasons for acting. No solution is better or worse than any other. We may call this attitude aesthetic because the one who adopts it claims to have no other relation to the world than one of detached contemplation. Outside of time and far from men, he faces history, which he thinks he does not belong to, like a pure beholding. This impersonal version equalizes all situations. It apprehends them only in the indifference of their differences, and it excludes any preference. She ties this attitude to a kind of tourism, that you're more or less a tourist in the world. You're seeing the sights, you're watching history unfold, but you don't consider yourself as a part of it or wrapped up in it. And this can become kind of dangerous because it renders people who adopt the aesthetic attitude complicit in activities that they fool themselves about. Again, we're back to this idea of bad faith. That you are committed in some ways, you are entangled in the world, but the attitude you have adopted obscures that entanglement and obscures that involvement, and that renders people sort of complicit. Some very staunch criticisms of French intellectuals, which I think we can again find room for and find targets of the similar criticism in today's world. She says, many Frenchmen also sought relief in this thought in 1940, as the Nazis are advancing and taking over France. Many Frenchmen also sought relief in this thought in 1940 and the years which followed. Let's try to take the point of view of history, they say, upon learning that the Germans had entered Paris. And during the whole occupation, certain intellectuals sought to keep aloof from the fray, and to consider impartially contingent facts which did not concern them. But we note at once that such an attitude appears in moments of discouragement and confusion. In fact, it is a position of withdrawal, a way of fleeing the truth of the present. So this attitude that certain intellectuals will take as though they're above the fray or though they're detached, that, well, it doesn't concern me, let's take the long view. History will go on, some other situation will occur, the great monuments of the past still stand, and so too will the monuments that we construct today, and so on. We still have the Colosseum and, the great cathedrals and all of this kind of stuff around. So if we just take the long view, we'll see that this is but a blip on the radar of history. But of course, humans don't live their lives in the long view. That's the problem that Beauvoir is trying to point out. No, we live our lives here and now with a view to our future, not some future 1,000 years from now or even 100 years from now or 500 years from now, but our future, which we can see and sketch out up to our death. And we can project a little bit beyond that, but any long view that we take into the future usually is grounded in some concern about what I'm going to do. If I'm concerned about my project 500 years into the future, it's because I would like my project to resonate in history, because I want to be able to conceive of myself as a Shakespeare or a Newton or a whatever, or a Beauvoir or something like that. This is why, again, the concern for that future under the long view is actually rooted in what I'm going to do today and how it will affect the world and resonate in that history that continues after my death. So what gives value and shapes our concern with the long view is always sort of rooted in the moment. Again, even the aesthetic attitude that she points out among the French is rooted in the confusion and the fear that they see in the moment. They respond this way because of what's happening right there. And so their aesthetic attitude is still a way of engaging with the present, but it's one that allows them a disavowal of that present, or they attempt a disavowal of it, right? I mean, this is the trick. This is why bad faith is bad faith. It's a lying to oneself, remember, about our engagement and the consequences of that engagement and our responsibility for what we're doing. And so this, oh, well, it doesn't concern me, is a sort of fool that we're fooling ourselves there. So the artist and the writer, the problem that is raised in a particularly acute and at the same time equivocal manner when one seeks to set up the indifferent human situation not in the name of pure contemplation, but of a definite project. The creator projects the work of art a subject. The creator projects toward the work of art a subject which he justifies insofar as it is the matter of his work. Any subject may thus be admitted, a massacre as well as a masquerade. The aesthetic judgment is sometimes so striking that it betrays the author's aim. Let us say that a writer wants to communicate the horror inspired in him by children working in sweatshops. He produces so beautiful a book that, enchanted by the tale, the style, and the images, we forget the horror of the sweatshops or even start admiring it. will we not be inclined to think of that if death, misery, and injustice can be transfigured for outer light, it is not an evil for there to be death, misery, and injustice. I think this is one of the things that you see all the time today. There's a tendency, I think, especially among well-off people in so-called Western countries, that, well, look at all of the great things that have been accomplished, right? All art and science and math and all this great stuff and so on and so forth. And so because we have all of this, the misery and death, that was the price we paid, not the price we paid, the price that others paid, historical others, slaves and servants and people in colonized countries and so on. That's justified then because, look, we got all this good stuff out of it. Beauvoir, of course, thinks that that's kind of nonsense. And this appeal to the accomplishments of art as if it would justify the suffering of others. Where for her, I think the purpose of writing about such things is exactly to draw out the concrete reality of them, which is laden with the horror imposed upon the people who suffer under it. So she goes on to say, with regard to the past, no further action is possible. There have been war, plague, scandal, and treason, and there is no way of our preventing their having taken place. The executioner became an executioner, and the victim underwent his fate as a victim without us. All we can do is reveal it, integrate it into the human heritage, to raise it to the dignity of aesthetic existence which bears within itself its finality. But first this history had to occur. It occurred as scandal, revolt, crime, or sacrifice, and we were able to try to save it only because it first offered us a form. Today must also exist before being confirmed in its existence. So Beauvoir is basically saying that we cannot make this appeal to the past as if the past justified the present. No, we are the ones who are justifying the present. The present must come into existence and we must act, and then we must offer our justification. The past will not justify the present. The past has happened and there's nothing that we can do about it except to now integrate it into our present moment in order to help make sense of it, and then determine a value that it's going to have relative to us and to our projects. Because what has happened in the past has been evaluated and attained a certain value as scandal, as crime, people as executioners and victims by those people that lived in the past. Those people for whom that past was a present. They are the ones that gave it the shape and offered us the form of history because their actions have taken on the appearance of a facticity for us from our perspective. But they cannot justify our present. Only we can do that. And if we do that by an appeal to the past, it's still our justification. It's not the past itself which would justify our present. Because those people are dead and done, and their justification lies at the time that they rendered their action, that they committed their action in the past, right? So I think that that's really important type of argument that you still see, I think, a lot today, especially among like Western chauvinists and stuff like that. Well, we're so great and everything, and whatever we've accomplished justifies that the past suffering of others, the past suffering of others. So, Beauvoir, her criticism of this aesthetic attitude is just one in which we can't get off the hook of our responsibility. So much of the book of the Ethics of Ambiguity up to this point has been Beauvoir dealing with ways that people try to wiggle out of their responsibility. That's a lot of what she was talking about in these profiles of bad faith: the nihilist, the serious one, the sub-man, the adventurer, and so on. These are different strategies and different ways of orienting themselves in the world where people try to remove themselves from responsibility, from being responsible. But the existentialism just doesn't allow for that. It's impossible. We are still responsible and free, and so the question becomes how do we navigate that and coordinate it with other people, right? So, again, the aesthetic attitude is just this view of detachment. You're a tourist in the world and in history. You act as though none of the events of the world concern you, that it has to do with other people over there, or that there are things that you can't do anything about. This sort of indifference leads us to a kind of complicity, because we don't then interject our actions to affect any kind of change. We just remove ourselves from the situation and sort of allow it to happen, which is a kind of negative action again. I mean, you're still acting and making a decision. You've decided to be indifferent, and to do, therefore, then nothing. So that's the basic aesthetic attitude that holds this indifferent, disinterested orientation toward the world. Okay, so I'll stop there, and we'll pick up the next video just going on into the next section about freedom and liberation. Okay, so thank you for joining me, and I'll see you in the next video.